Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the National Press Club for today's event, hosted jointly by the European Leadership Network and the Arms Control Association to discuss AI and the risks to nuclear decision-making and to launch this new paper by Alice Saltini. Thank you very much for giving up your time on this beautiful day here in Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you that are joining us online from all over the world. We really appreciate it. My name is Jane Kinnan-Mont. I'm the Director of Policy and Impact at the European Leadership Network. We are a network that brings together young leaders with experienced practitioners in diplomacy and security policy to work together across generations and across nationalities to try to find solutions to complex policy problems. And reducing the risks of nuclear war is really our founding mission. Recently, we've been looking more and more at the possible intersections between emerging and disruptive technologies and nuclear weapons, where we're really only beginning to understand the risks. And that's what this report looks into in some depth. We'd like to thank the US Department of State for supporting this research. It's been carried out over a period of several months with workshops and with literature reviews, and we've tried to bring together perspectives from not only the US and Europe, but also from Russia and China. And this seems to be particularly timely this week as Biden and Xi prepare to have an important meeting. Just another thing to note is that today's event is on the record and it is being webcast. You're very welcome to live tweet, and if so, we'd love it if you would use the hashtag AI nuclear risks. Feel free to tag Arms Control Now and at the ELN, and we'll be happy to boost your tweets and try and get some online discussion going. So, without further ado, I would really like to turn to Alice Saltini, our research associate, and firstly to say congratulations on this groundbreaking report that people are getting to see for the first time today. It's a real achievement. And so that people can leave this room and tell their friends they've read it already, I'd like to ask you to outline for everyone here the key points about these risks and what we can do about them. Over to you, Alice. Thank you very much.
Of course, Jane. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone to be here. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the panelists for being here. And again, thank you very much for the State Department for supporting our research and our event. So, the nuclear weapon states are increasingly recognizing the implications of integrating AI into nuclear command, control, and communications, so-called NC3 systems. These days, we've seen increasing interest from states in coming to a shared understanding of AI risks in the military domain and for peace and security. The recent UK AI summit has culminated with the Bletchley Declaration, which, among other things, recognized safety risks posed by quote-unquote frontier AI models. The US political declaration on the responsible military use was also updated recently. On top of that, the UN Secretary General announced the creation of UN advisory body with the goal to create preliminary recommendations on international governance of AI. There have been also some rumors regarding upcoming US-China discussions on keeping AI out of nuclear decisions, which is supposed to take place on the sideline of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, due to start in only 2 days. So these events really underline the urgency of having this conversation today. Now, AI is a very diverse field with many approaches, which are highly varied and present vastly different characteristics and levels of risks. AI is really not a new term, and some AI systems are already integrated into NC3 systems in nuclear weapon states. But comparing these systems to the predominant approach used in AI today is really not helpful because of the vast differences between today's AI model and earlier ones. Today's advanced AI models, such as foundation models and large language models, pose new and significantly greater challenges and risks. Today's advanced models demonstrated an unparalleled ability to generalize across diverse tasks and to continuously improve as they are fed with higher quality and larger data sets and more computational power. This has led to the development of tremendous capabilities. But these capabilities also bring many unresolved problems that severely hamper their applicability into sensitive domains. This mostly stems from the fact that these models are unreliable. For instance, they confidently produce incorrect outputs unsupported by their training data, a phenomenon called hallucination. This unreliability is compounded by the black box nature of AI, which makes it very, very difficult to understand the underlying processes leading to a particular output, as well as the vulnerability to cyber attacks. Moreover, as these models develop and become more and more capable, their alignment to our goals and values become ever more important. Now, the risks posed by these new advanced AI models have been highlighted in the Bletchley Declaration of November 1st, where 29 states, including US, UK, France, and China, affirmed that understanding potential risk provided by these frontier models and actions to address them is especially urgent. Now, although it is certainly possible to identify risks and benefits for AI integration from the nuclear weapon state's point of view and their impact on strategic stability from a holistic perspective, determining AI-generated risks for each possible application within the NC3 framework is inherently challenging. This is not only because, as I said, AI models vary significantly, but also because their risks profiles change based on the application area. For example, current state-of-the-art models can be trained to perform exceptionally well in complex tasks, but they do so without revealing their internal decision-making processes. This lack of transparency obviously has varying implications depending on the NC3 application, less critical in areas such as training personnel, for example, but crucial in systems that are directly tied to strategic decision-making. As nuclear weapon states are currently debating the integration of generative AI in military systems, it's vital to understand these technology nuances. This debate, I want to underline, does not reference specifically nuclear weapons. It does not do it. But the discussion's relevance to military AI system makes understanding this technology absolutely crucial. Now, official sources do not provide many details about how nuclear weapon states envision today's AI models playing into their nuclear development and modernization programs. But nevertheless, what we know is that these states have made the pursuit of AI a strategic priority. Their goals vary from striving for technological dominance to ensuring strategic autonomy. However, although the risks of this integration are broadly acknowledged by nuclear weapon states, the benefits that AI brings to the table, such as for better and faster threat detection and for decision support functions, is compelling to them. This country's pursuit for a military edge or the desire to prevent adversaries from gaining strategic advantages could potentially prompt states to prioritize swift AI integration whose reliability is yet to be verified. Now, each state approaches integration with nuances reflecting specific nuclear doctrines, military cultures, civil-military relations, and ethical consideration. But it is difficult to have a detailed assessment due to the limited publicly available information on this topic. Most of the existing literature centers around the US, but lacks in-depth analysis of official sources of other nuclear weapon states, particularly Russia and China. However, all the states recognize AI's potential to improve situational awareness, early threat detection, force management, and decision support processes. They are equally aware of the risks, so data flaws and poisoning, biases, cyber vulnerabilities could skew decision-making, potentially leading to unintended escalation and possibly undermining strategic stability. Even though official documents might bypass explicit nuclear mentions, open source records hint at a shared understanding among these countries, which is fully automated nuclear decision-making is just a no-go. The concept of keeping humans in the loop seems to be universally acknowledged, but its interpretation varies. The US, UK, and France are clear about ensuring human oversight in nuclear decisions, while in China and Russia present a bit more of an opaque stance. But there is an underlying consensus among experts and military leaders that AI should not and will not supplant human control in strategic decision-making. This underscores the need for clearly defining red lines among nuclear weapon states and the risk assessment framework with a view to establishing norms or codes of conduct for safe AI integration. Now, with that in mind, the report proposes different recommendations from multilateral and bilateral initiatives, but for the time constraint, I would like to pick up just on a couple of specific points which are exceptionally relevant in light of the upcoming meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping on the sideline of the summit of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, where the topic of AI and nuclear weapons is poised to come up. Now, the Bletchley Declaration of November 1st calls for classifications and categorizations of risks based on national circumstances and applicable legal frameworks. This report attempts exactly to provide an initial solution to this issue by establishing the first preliminary framework that can be used by nuclear weapon states to establish norms and thresholds. This would allow for the identification of high-risk AI integration in specific NC3 applications, considering the model's characteristics. The framework provides an initial broad concept for how metrics can be developed based on parameters that impact models' risks of integration. Now, the proposed metrics fall into two broad categories: technological and integration risks. Technological risks cover a model's generalizability, which means the model's adaptability across different functions, its scalability, which refers to how efficiently a certain model can grow when fed with more data and computational power, and its overall performance. Moreover, technological risks include also transparency, referred to the model's interpretability, meaning, as I said, how well we understand the decisions made by the model, and finally, reliability, which includes risks of hallucinations, cybersecurity risks, and models alignment. These factors are deeply interconnected. As of today, as the model grows in capability, and so becoming, as I said, more generalizable, more scalable, and performing better, it also becomes less transparent. This increases the black box nature of AI, where we see its outputs, but we really don't understand its decision-making processes. So this lack of transparency can make it challenging to anticipate reliability issues, such as hallucinations, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and making the impact of steering these models, the so-called alignment problem, potentially even more complex. So there is significant interplay between these factors, and there is still a lot of research that must be done to uncover the exact dynamic of these associations. Then the second area covers integration risks, which assess the model's impact and required automation within NC3 application, ranging from low impact, such as, for instance, monitoring system health and training personnel, to moderate, such as sensor data analysis, to potentially high impact, such as suggesting courses of action during a crisis and target identification. This matrix is further compounded by the level of autonomy, which can range from light automation to full autonomy. Now, the risk profiling systems, these risk profiling systems, can be elaborated into a more comprehensive framework which can provide specific risk profiles as well as a scoring system, a sort of a calculator, if you wish, to enable the classification of high-risk AI systems in high-risk integration areas and create a threshold bearing their use. The highest risks, as of today, are posed by state-of-the-art models, such as foundation models, including large language models, because they lack reliability due to the proneness to hallucinate, because of their black box nature, because of our inability to effectively steer these models through alignment, and because of their susceptibility to cyber attacks. However, this doesn't mean that narrower, more specialized systems cannot pose risks. For example, computer vision models that have low transparency and high risk of hallucinations provide high level of risks if integrated in systems related to satellite imagery analysis, for example. This shows how risks are heavily dependent upon the area of integration. In any case, the initial framework can be further elaborated by states and utilized to clearly define thresholds for safe AI integration. Using this risk assessment framework and considering the significant risks posed by cutting-edge AI models, nuclear weapon states should impose a moratorium on the integration of these models into specific NC3 areas that pose sufficiently high risks. The moratorium should remain in place for high-risk models until and if reliability of these models drastically improves. As AI technology evolves and reliability issues are addressed, if at all, the framework can then be reapplied again to reassess the model's risks in NC3 applications. And I would leave it at that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Bugis. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Arms Control Association. So Jane and I are tag teaming, moderating this excellent panel. So we're going to turn now to Matthew Sharp, who's with us from the State Department. And I know there's a recent change in name, so let's see if I get this right. Matthew is the director of the Office of Multilateral Nuclear Affairs in the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability at the U.S. State Department.
Perfect.
All right, excellent. We got the new name, so thank you for being here. So what we hope to hear from you is how the Biden administration is thinking about AI, particularly when it comes into play in the nuclear domain. So we've seen a whole bunch of AI-focused efforts come out of the Biden administration over the past couple years. Alice highlighted a number of them, such as the political declaration from February, as well as there was also an introduction of an AI Bill of Rights, an updated directive on autonomy and weapon systems, a major investment in setting up AI research institutes back in May, and we could obviously go on and on. So I have a few questions, and you're welcome to take them as you want, but to kind of get at what we're trying to understand better with having you on this panel is, can you talk to us, to the extent you're able, about the behind the scenes thought processes and goals that are informing these efforts? How does the US government assess and view the risks and opportunities of AI in weapon systems, especially in nuclear systems? Essentially, what is top of mind in the government when discussing the AI nuclear nexus? Take it from there. Trying to address all of that in 4 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. I'll use just a few seconds of my 4 minutes to thank ELN and the Arms Control Association for the event and for having me here. Thank you, Alice, for the exposition just now, but also for the excellent report. I think the State Department, and in particular our bureau now, ADS, is very proud and happy to have had the opportunity to support this work through our verification fund. It's an important contribution to a topic that couldn't be more urgent and important right now. And I think that's driven by our sense that the technology is just moving at such a breathtakingly fast pace, that our ability to respond to it in a policy context is strained by that pace. And so it's very important in that context that we have a clear-eyed and honest assessment and understanding of both the risks and the possibilities of these technologies. And so maybe I can start with the more general and work our way in to the more specific. A lot of the Biden administration objectives and actions that you mentioned were focused more generally on artificial intelligence in a broader sense. I think we've also, in this administration and in my bureau in particular, focused on the applicability and use of artificial intelligence in military applications, again, generally, beyond just nuclear. And there, as the report shows and goes into some depth on, there are both risks and opportunities. You know, there are opportunities for things like minimizing civilian harm. There are opportunities in avoiding unintentional engagement. There are places where the technology can help result in more stability and not less. But the risks are also very clear, and the report lays them out, and you just helped walk through some of them briefly with us now. You know, the risks need to be approached in a way that allows us to balance those opportunities against the risks in a way that leads towards more stability and not less. And at the UK AI Safety Summit that was just mentioned, Vice President Harris noted that, quote, to provide order and stability in the midst of global technological change, we must be guided by a common set of understandings among nations. And so that is a principle that we are very engaged with in ADS and in the State Department in trying to implement in the form of an institutionalized dialogue with our international partners, with all of the key stakeholders that are quite diverse on this very thorny set of questions, and in the form of what we've called the Political Declaration on the Responsible Military Use of Artificial Intelligence and Autonomy. Just this morning in New York, there was an event with the United States and our now 45 co-subscribers to the Political Declaration to roll out that text, which features 10 basic practices and general themes to approach this set of questions. In other words, the high-level sorts of guidelines and aspects of an approach that can help lead to the responsible and thoughtful deployment that we seek to do that balancing between risks and opportunities. Things like calling for legal reviews of the implementation of technology, looking for ways to minimize unintended biases in those systems in some of the ways that Alice mentioned. Finding opportunities for rigorous testing and quality assurance, senior oversight as these tools are implemented into military uses. So this political declaration lays out a set of 10 of those general high-level themes and approaches, but the event this morning really went further in rolling out what we anticipate will be a very inclusive and international dialogue over the next months and years as we seek to turn those high-level principles into more tractable and implementable next steps. And so that dialogue was kicked off this morning in New York, as I mentioned. The political declaration is not nuclear in focus. It's about the military uses of the technologies. And so maybe to say a few words about the nuclear focus of this report and this panel. Again, we see benefits as well as risks. Here, benefits can include more cyber, in a cyber sense, more resiliency to command and control systems, physical security, better, faster information coming to decision makers. These are the kinds of things that the technology can enable that in principle could lead to more stability and not less. But the risks, I think, also are quite clear. They also include aspects of the cyber realm, but maybe more uniquely, and as the report goes into some detail on, at this new and sort of unique interface between humans and the algorithms. How do you assure that the confidence that's placed in the outputs of these tools is at an appropriate level? You want to get that confidence right, of course, to avoid misinterpretation and unfortunate consequences. All the more important in the nuclear sphere. And so again, I think what we see is that the way to thoughtfully and responsibly approach the rollout of these tools in the nuclear realm is to do so in a way that can balance and understand those risks and those opportunities in the right way. And so once again, the political declaration is a framework for going through that kind of responsible decision-making and implementation, and it's one that we see as applicable also in nuclear decision-making. More specifically, and Alicia mentioned this, there are specific constraints that we can speak to, and we've done so in the Biden administration in the form of the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review, which said that we would, quote, maintain a human in the loop for all actions critical to informing and executing decisions by the president to initiate and terminate nuclear employment. And so that was in our Nuclear Posture Review. Alicia mentioned that the P3, the French, the UK, and we together made a very similar statement in a paper that we presented to the 2022 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference. Same basic gist. It's a constraint, it's a policy statement that we view as important. It's one that we hope that others will follow us in making on their own parts. And then to respect your time limit, just a last word. I think that the bottom line for us, and in all of these different venues where this topic is being put to the front, there are these policy statements these decisions and statements of policy that can be helpful in a very specific way. There are these guardrails, rules of the road, guidelines that you can articulate for a more general approach to the incorporation of the technology. All of these are the instruments available to us from the perspective of the Arms Control Bureau at the State Department and from our government more broadly to trying to seek a responsible implementation and a thoughtful, responsible approach as we look to implement these new and important tools into military uses, but nuclear weapons use in particular.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving us some insight into what's going on behind the scenes with a lot of these efforts. So before I come back to you with 2 additional questions, I want to remind the audience that after Matthew answers these questions and then we go to Tom for some reaction, we will be then turning to Q&A from all of you, so start getting your questions ready as well. So Matthew, a two-part follow-up questions. So first of all, as we've mentioned, the State Department sponsored this new research by the European Leadership Network. So for anyone who's putting together research proposals for AI, listen up when Matthew answers this question, which is, can you highlight for us why this type of research is important? How is it going to then inform governments, and what are you seeking to kind of get out of a lot of this type of research? And then second, can you describe more of what the Biden administration is doing to address the risks? And by that, I'm looking specifically at, all right, where do we go from here? So the political declaration, you've touched on this a bit in your answer of kind of what comes next, right? But if you could talk a little bit more about that specifically so that perhaps in Q&A we can come back around and figure out where the Biden administration's thinking and a lot of Alice's proposals about where to go may coincide.
Yes, so the tool with which our Bureau supported this work is our verification fund. It supports smallish scale research projects in the academic and NGO world on a full suite of verification-focused arms control topics. This is actually one of 2 on topics related to artificial intelligence in the last round of support. The other is focused more on the potential benefits of emerging technologies and artificial intelligence in particular to new verification mechanisms. Are there ways that we can harvest broad data sets in the kind of traditional task of verifying arms control commitments and obligations? And so I think the answer to the question of why we see value in supporting this kind of work is that we recognize that there are both new challenges that are fundamentally different than we've faced before, that stem from new technology, and also opportunities there that can help and enable the work that we do at the State Department and the Arms Control Bureau specifically. And I think we understand that in general this is true. It's an old tool. It predates the emergence of these large language models, but they are a great example of a place where we don't have all the answers inside the government. There is a very vibrant interagency discussion on all these topics. There's a vibrant international conversation in the most visible way these days in the political declaration sphere. But there are other smart people out there who will see things that we don't or we can't, and will generate the ideas that help us develop both the tools that take advantage of those opportunities where we can find them, and the tools that protect us against the risks that may be unanticipated. And so I think it's exceedingly important across the space of arms control that we have those voices given an opportunity to contribute. But this is a topic where it couldn't possibly be more important. So thank you again for the work. In terms of next steps, I'm the wrong expert to speak too far down the road. I'm filling in for some of my colleagues here who are actually in New York for the political declaration rollout. But as I understand from them, today we have gathered over the course of the past months of diplomacy a group of now 45, maybe it was 45 this morning, it may be more by now, states that agree with the principle that we need to have this thoughtful and deliberative conversation about how military applications of these technologies go forward. And so what does that look like over the next months? You can think about expert level discussion, you can think about exercises and workshops. I think these are very general principles that are enshrined in the political declaration that we have today, but their implementation is quite complicated. And so I think that's where it's necessary to bring the sort of technical and expert level into contact with those higher level political concepts. And so I think that's the discussion that we're looking to kick off. It's important for the same reasons that I mentioned before, that this be an inclusive dialogue. And so I think that's why it's so important that we have now 45 countries lined up and ready to take it forward. And we'll continue to look to broaden that discussion further. And so I think as that dialogue now kicks off, we'll be looking to do that balancing that I described between the obvious risks and sometimes the less obvious benefits.
Okay. Thank you. Back over to Jane.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Shannon. And now I'd like to bring in Tom McCain. Tom is a former Director General at the UK Ministry of Defence and also a valued member of the ELN Senior Network. So, Tom, you took part in some of the consultations for this project alongside experts from all the P5 countries. I'd love to hear your impressions and especially any thoughts you might have on where is there common ground.
Thanks, Jane. I think, first of all, it's worth saying that it's quite a happy coincidence in a way that this report is being launched on the same day as the political declaration in New York and following closely in the heels of President Biden's executive order on this topic and the Bletchley Declaration that Matthew referred to in the UK a week or two ago. It's good that people are talking broadly about these issues. I should say that in my own career, while I did deal quite a bit with nuclear policy, it was a less fraught time, I think it's fair to say, in the period following the end of the Cold War and up until about 10 years ago. But even so, integrity of nuclear command and control and communication systems was always uppermost in people's minds. And I think the fact that I'm here today as a former defense and sort of nuclear deterrence person demonstrates that it's possible to be both a firm believer in nuclear deterrence and also concerned about the risks that AI poses. In fact, I've been looking at this topic in some detail for the last few years. I started out looking at it as one of a number of so-called novel and disruptive technologies that might bear on nuclear deterrence, including hypersonics and so on. But I concluded then that actually AI and cyber, in no particular order, were the most worrying areas in terms of the integrity of the control over nuclear deterrent systems. So I think this, as I've said, this report is timely. I was able to take part in one of the workshops, and I think the things that struck me most were, it was interesting to have a discussion involving people from the UK and the US and France and Russia and China, although of course the people who had come in from Russia and China were not members of the government or even terribly closely linked to them, I think it's probably fair to say. But we were able to review the bibliography, which you can access by using the QR code at the back of this report, which is actually worth having a glance at, because it gives you a rather rich picture of opinions and views that have been expressed in the UK, France, China, and Russia on these topics in the round. And one of the things that I thought that was hopeful about it was that there was a general sense that it was important to maintain human direction over any of this technology. Now, that is obviously not an official position across all of these P5, but it was a view that I think was fairly clear and came out at the workshop. The other thing that struck me was it was a very interesting mix that had been gathered by ELN of people who were very much from the AI community, who were expert in that field, as well as people from, I suppose you'd describe them as more of the arms control security community. And that was quite a rich mix. And I was struck by the fact that the AI people, and you've probably seen this in the media, will say that when they're thinking about the risks involved in what they're doing, think about the parallels with nuclear safety and security. So I think it would be good if governments too continue to push these two different communities together to engage in this topic. Another thing that struck me at that event was the use of a term fear mapping, which was a new one for me. And fear mapping means getting people to set down all the things that they worry about most in relation to a particular topic, and engage together in discussing how these risks or threats might be managed. And I think that idea is one that might be taken further in the future in this context. There's been Alicia ran through a number of the recommendations in the report. I don't think you need to agree with every recommendation in this report to support its overall thrust. I think, for example, the proposed moratorium may have definitional problems. I think that the risk profiling that Alicia described is a good idea, and it could be, as you said, developed further to see whether it provides a better definition of what precisely we are concerned about here. But I think that said, everybody should be able to agree on the vital importance of protecting the integrity of nuclear command control and communications. Another point I would make, and I don't know if it came out in the workshop, but inevitably there is secrecy surrounding these systems, perfectly justifiable secrecy. And I think that is a real-world constraint in terms of how you bring all the relevant parties together to address the risks identified here. It's a significant verification challenge apart from anything else. Though, having mentioned the word verification, I suppose that one might think of whether there are ways in which AI itself could help with that topic. It's worth mentioning the what has been called the fail-safe approach, which was put in train in the following the last nuclear policy posture review here in the US. That seems to me to be another possible way to get into some of these risks by involving outside parties who are trusted parties to look into systems and identify where there may or may not be problems. And I think that's an idea that could be taken further, though one would have to acknowledge that it might be a difficult approach in authoritarian states. And let me finish by echoing Matthew's reference to the P3 statement that came out a year or so ago on maintaining a human in the loop in relation to nuclear weapons. Given what I've said earlier about some of the material that was uncovered in the bibliography, it doesn't seem to me to be completely beyond the realms of credibility that the P5 could sign up to some such statement. Obviously, that would be very much a bit of declaratory policy rather than anything more concrete or verifiable, but it would be worth doing nonetheless. And I'll just finish by saying, what about the other states in the world that are possessors of nuclear weapons? I think that some of the points that are made in this report may apply even more keenly to them.
Thank you, Tom, and back to you, Shannon.
Great, so now we're turning to the Q&A portion with all of you. So Caroline from NTI will be helping with bringing a mic around. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. We'll wait a beat. If not, I can start up, but we have one question right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very timely report, as everyone already said. My name is Oleg Shakirov. I have a question to everyone, but in particular to Matthew. So right now it's obvious that the United States is driving this agenda, and other P5 states are only thinking about this, in my mind. And I want to ask in particular about how do you think the United States will approach Russia and China? And these are very different situations. So with Russia, there is a long history of arms control diplomacy between Russia and the United States. But currently, there is no dialogue almost. And it's unclear whether it will resume. But if it does resume, do you think the United States will put this issue of AI on the agenda? And with China, it's quite different. There is virtually no history of arms control comparable to Soviet, Russian, US. But on the other hand, we saw these stories that apparently in a couple of days, China-US relations on arms control will leapfrog from having nothing to talking about such sophisticated topic. So how do you think it's there is any kind of future for US-China dialogue more than just political declarations?
Great, thank you for your question. Before you answer, Matthew, were there any others? Otherwise, I wanted to add a few on. Oh, over at the back table, please, Caroline. And we'll take a few of these, let them answer, and then Jane will do another round of questions. And I think we'll go for questions for around 15, 20 minutes. I know we started a little bit late, so we'll keep the question portion going. But please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the discussion. I had a question on the political declaration. And as of like a couple of hours ago, states like Russia, China, Israel, India, Pakistan aren't endorsing states on the political declaration. And to some extent, this might be because folks might see a departure between the stated policy of the State Department and perhaps the Defense Department. So like on one hand, there's this political declaration, but then there's also the replicator program, there's Task Force Lima, and then there's the problem of secrecy, which compounds all of that. So to what extent do you think the State Department's diplomacy on this front is made complicated by developments inside DoD when it comes to AI and military command and control?
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll take one more question right now.
Yeah, thank you for so much for the discussion. I'm Han Beol-sung from Korean National Defense University. I think it's for the non-nuclear weapon state, without any single nuclear weapons, and we are worrying about the nuclear weapons in only nuclear weapon state. And moreover, it will be handed to the AI. So I think that it is strengthening the have or have-nots problem. It's a Korean perspective. So my question is that what do you think of the AI effect on nuclear arms reduction for the nuclear weapon state? And question number two is what would be the perspective of the nuclear armed state, including India, Pakistan, or North Korea? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the last question is definitely a free-for-all. Matthew, you were definitely put on the hot seat, I think, with a fair number of questions. So we'll start with you and then go to Alice and Tom. And for Alice and Tom, I have some questions for you if you could address as well. So Alice, if anyone wants to look at pages 16 and 17 in the report, you have this chart that's comparing different views among the P5. And what always strikes me when I see charts like this is I really want to know from the person who created it, right? What, like, among those differing views, which we've seen already when you mentioned earlier different definitions of keeping human in the loop, what do you view as like the biggest hurdles, right? Where are the points where there can perhaps be those moments of optimism, right? But as we all know in the arms control world, definitions of things can be a big stumbling block. So just would like to hear more about putting together that chart. What were the biggest takeaways? And then Tom, you've talked a bit about your participation in the workshop. And so as many of us here, as someone who has participated in workshops, I want to know what the biggest fights were, right? What were the biggest debates among the participants, and what surprised you? What was one of your main takeaways from the workshop, and do you think that was reflected in the report? All right, so I think all of you have a lot that you have to answer, but we'll start with Matthew, Alice, then Tom. Matthew?
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think they're good ones. Again, the technology is moving so fast, and the speed of our ability to use sort of traditional diplomatic and arms control tools is strained by that speed. And so I think the step that we're focused on at the moment is the political declaration. And it's true that while it is robustly ascribed to, it is not universally ascribed to. And you named between the two questions several of the states that are missing from that list. It's not a finished product in the sense that the endorsing parties today will not be the only ones, we hope. And so I think there's every reason to anticipate and work towards an outcome where the states that were mentioned can also join on and participate in that international dialogue and ascribe to the same general principles that are written in the political declaration now. And so that's the first point. But the second point on the premise that the US is leading, I mean, I hope we are. I hope we're playing a leadership role. But I think we would object to the premise that we're doing it by ourselves. I think the P3 statement is a really important one. It shows alignment in an area where, as Tom knows very well, the words matter a lot. And the difficulty, even among friends, of closing those gaps is not trivial. And so I think the fact that we have a statement in common language from the P3 is an important data point. I think the report and the table that the next question we'll get at is really illuminating. And it's our impression also that all of the P5, while they have very different ways of talking about their nuclear doctrine, there is something of a commonality here on the sense of just how important it is to have humans, or maybe even very specific humans, as part of the loop of decision making on something as consequential as nuclear employment. And so I do think that there are aspects of common ground there. There's some reasons for hope that the dialogue on the concepts of a political declaration could evolve in a different direction. And you saw our National Security Advisor mention now 5 months ago in an Arms Control Association event that, that we hope this is an example of an area where we see potential utility to greater work among the 5 nuclear weapon states towards measures that can concretely reduce risks of nuclear conflict. I think there are pathways forward to see this be an inclusive effort in the directions that the questions mentioned. I think the third question maybe, oh sorry, the second question addressed also DoD. You know, we at the State Department, you know, our job is to be conducting foreign policy on the basis of US positions that are held across the government. And so of course, there should not be any such gaps from one agency to the next. What we say and the basis of our diplomacy is based on our policies and practice inside. DoD has been quite transparent over the past years about the ways in which these kinds of new technologies and artificial intelligence in particular are threaded through their broader programs and activities. And so I think I would commend to you that work. But the conclusion, I think, from those reports is that our policy is fully consistent with the principles that are being laid out in this political declaration, and they'll stay such.
Thank you. Alice.
Thank you. So on your question regarding the biggest hurdles among P5 states, well, in my opinion, what really struck me at the workshop, maybe Tom can also confirm that, but based on the research we have conducted and based on the bibliographies that we have commissioned, it really strikes me as like each one of the nuclear weapon states, they really do see AI as a strategic priority. So it is something that it is really worth pursuing for a military edge. So really the biggest hurdle that I see here is that nuclear weapon states do see a lot of the benefits, which of course AI provides, but this might kind of hide the risks that certain models kind of entail, and mostly depending on the area of integration. One thing that I think was actually really kind of important that came up during the workshop was that there doesn't seem to be that much interest for states, for some of the nuclear weapon states, to actually integrate AI, and especially these types of models, into core NC3 functions. This is something that I found particularly true in some of the nuclear weapon states. Some of the others was a bit more unclear, but I think that, you know, as Tom mentioned, as Matt mentioned, it is really kind of critical at this point to come up to a shared understanding of what risks are if we take humans control out of the loop. Yeah, so that's the thing. Yeah, so that's the thing. The biggest thing that struck me. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, on the workshop, I think that it wasn't really a workshop where there was, where there were a lot of fireworks. There weren't major disagreements. There was quite a lot of excitement involved in the tabletop exercises, where there were lots of different points of view being expressed on how to address the challenges that we were asked to deal with. But I think that everybody at the event took a pretty sober and level-headed approach to what they were being asked to discuss. The thing that I took away from it, perhaps the most striking thing, was one or two of the people who were from the AI tech community stressed, how few people there were in the world who were really at the cutting edge of this technology. People talked about engineers at that level being numbered in hundreds. And B, that a large proportion of them were not keen to work on defense projects. And so you instantly were being told, well, there's a bit of a challenge here. But I hoped that while people might not wish to work with defense companies, they might be keen to work on addressing some of the risks that are being talked about in this report. But I do think that's a significant thing. And if I can just turn to the point that was the question that was asked about the impact on both, say, India and Pakistan and on non-nuclear weapon states. I mean, everybody knows that it's difficult to engage with India and Pakistan on these questions, and this will not be any easier to discuss with these governments than other broader questions of nuclear deterrence, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to do it. And on the effect it might have on non-nuclear weapon states, I guess it will heighten some concerns among non-nuclear weapon states parties to the NPT, and that this will become an issue of greater debate in the context of review conferences and so on. I would be amazed if it doesn't.
Thank you, Tom. So we have an opportunity just for a couple more questions before we invite you to join us for lunch. Who would like to, Caroline, bring the mic to the gentleman here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you again to the panel for the discussion on this topic. This is for Alice on the research. I was curious if you personally, after doing this research, or any experts in the arms control or cyber realm express concerns that integrating even like lower risk AI into NC3 could create like a problematic new vector for cyber attacks from states or non-state actors, especially since NC3 struggles with the always never dilemma, always having to maintain security. I was just wondering if you could talk about that at all.
Thank you. And we have time for one or two more if anyone else would like to come in. If not, then I'll just turn back to Alice to comment on that. And I just also wanted to say to our guests from Korea that I think Korea is going to be an extremely important voice in this discussion in the coming months as your country hosts the upcoming Re-AIM conference on AI in the military. So we hope to be discussing much more with that part of the world in due course. But Alice, I'll turn to you and just give you the closing word on this session.
Yeah, no, certainly, absolutely. We actually did talk a lot about that. It came up very often into the conversation. So cyber attacks was really kind of one of the main points that participants discussed about. And as you mentioned, also lower risks AI models. So we're not just talking just about these cutting edge models, but we also refer to lower risk models. Of course, now when we have to distinguish between the two types, these cutting edge models, they actually do provide more risks in cyber vulnerabilities, as we know that, because as they grow bigger and bigger, it would be more difficult for us to detect cyber vulnerabilities. So of course, it is something that is mostly associated to bigger models, but also smaller models, more specialized models, narrower. That's something that absolutely came up about that. And I'm sorry, I actually wanted to respond about the non-nuclear weapon states. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. But this is actually something really interesting. It also came up during a panel that I attended during the NPT PrepCon. And one of the delegates actually asked me exactly the same questions, which was, so what can non-nuclear weapon states request to nuclear weapon states, that they do in terms of AI? At that point, I didn't have much of an answer for the delegate, because it's something that I really wanted to think through. But non-nuclear weapon states do actually have a big, they should have a big voice to play, especially in the NPT context. I actually wrote about, I can show it to you, but I actually wrote a commentary about how important it is to refer to AI, to actually talk about AI, start discussion within the NPT system, because it would involve also non-nuclear weapon states. They should have a voice in that. Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Alice. Back to Shannon.
All right, I know everyone is probably hungry. I know my stomach is grumbling, so we'll close out the session. Thank you to our stellar panelists for taking part, and to Alice for writing this excellent report. I know this conversation, and I hope it was as helpful for you as it was for me in realizing a lot of the conversation that is going on about AI and the AI nuclear nexus and how people are thinking about problem solving. So thank you again to all of our panelists. Make sure to take a copy of the report with you. We'll definitely be sticking around if you have any follow-up questions, and enjoy lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.